Michael Behe received a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Pennsylvania. He has authored over 40 technical papers, as well as the best-selling book, Darwin's Black Box, The Biochemical Challenge to Evolution, which argues that living systems at the molecular level are best explained as being the result of deliberate intelligent design. For the past 20 years, Dr. Behe has been professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University.
I'd like to start by saying that it's not just myself, not even just ID people, intelligent design people, but a number of scientists have been skeptical that microevolutionary processes, Darwinian processes, can explain larger patterns in biology and especially in the molecular biology of the cell. For example, Stuart Kaufman, who's a professor at the University of Calgary right now, wrote in a book in 1993 that it is not that Darwin is wrong, but that he got hold of only part of the truth. For Darwin's answer to the sources of the order we see all around us is overwhelmingly an appeal to a singular force, natural selection. It is this single force view which I believe to be inadequate, for it fails to notice, fails to stress, fails to incorporate the possibility that simple and complex systems exhibit order spontaneously. And this was published by Oxford University Press, an academic publishing house. Why are some scientists skeptical that Darwinian processes can account for what they see, especially at the molecular level of life? Because in the past 50 years, science has discovered, much to their surprise, and which was completely unknown in the time of Darwin, that the cell, the basis of life, is composed of machines. Literally machines made out of molecules. This illustration up here is a cover from the journal Cell, which was published in 1998, a special review issue on the topic of molecular machines. And inside, on the table of contents, there are listed a number of articles, such as the cell as a collection of protein machines, polymerases in the replosome, machines within machines, mechanical devices of the spliceosome, motors, clocks, springs, and things. And the editor of this special issue was a man named Bruce Alberts, who is the president of the National Academy of Sciences. And in his introduction, he states, "We have always underestimated cells. Undoubtedly, we still do today. But at least we are no longer as naive as we were when I was a graduate student in the 1960s. The chemistry that makes life possible is much more elaborate and sophisticated than anything we students had ever considered. Indeed, the entire cell can be viewed as a factory that contains an elaborate network of interlocking assembly lines, each of which is composed of a set of large protein machines." Now, why is this a difficulty for Darwin's theory? He wrote that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down, adding, "But I can find out no such case." Here he was insisting that his was a gradual theory. Natural selection had to improve things slowly, in many steps, over a long period of time. He knew that if things improved too quickly, it would look like something other than random processes were involved. Well, what sort of a system can't be explained, or is very difficult to explain by numerous successive slight modifications? One which is irreducibly complex, or has the property of irreducible complexity. This is a fancy phrase. It just means that you've got a system with a number of different components that interact with each other to produce a function beyond the system, or beyond the components itself. And an example I cited in my book, Darwin's Black Box, on this, from our everyday life, is a mousetrap. A mousetrap has a number of different components, such as a spring, holding bar, catch, and so on. And it needs all these components to work. If you take away the catch, if you take away the spring, if you take away the holding bar, it's not that it works half as well as it used to. It's broken. It doesn't work at all. Now, things like this are a problem for a gradual theory like Darwin's, because the function of an irreducibly complex system only appears essentially when the system is complete. In intermediate stages, there's nothing for natural selection to select. And after it's finished, there's not a whole lot for natural selection to do. So things like this are challenges to Darwin's theory of gradual evolution. So are there any such irreducibly complex systems in the cell? And I argue that there are many of them. Yes, they're all over the place. This is the bacterial flagellum. It is quite literally an outboard motor that bacteria use to swim. It's got a number of different components, like a propeller, which actually pushes against the water and pushes the bacterium forward as the rotor spins. There's a hook region which acts as a universal joint to attach the propeller to the drive shaft. The drive shaft is attached to the rotor, which uses a flow of acid from the outside to the inside of the cell. There's parts that act as a stator to keep it clamped onto the cell membrane, just like an outboard motor has to be clamped onto a boat as the propeller turns. And there are many other components as well.
In the first paper that you did with Dr. Snoke, what was the bottom line conclusion of that? Could you sort of simplify that?
The bottom line was that a process called gene duplication, where a gene coding for a particular protein is duplicated and is free to accumulate mutations, is unlikely to lead to new protein features which require more than a couple amino acid changes to produce them. Once you go beyond just one change to lead to the new feature, and you need 2 or 3 or 4, which is the case if you need to develop a new specific interaction between two proteins, then the expected amount of time that would take in reasonable population times starts to become prohibitive, over 100 million generations and higher.
And how many members in the population in that 100 million generations?
Well, again, it depends on the number of loci, but if you consider about 6, which is roughly the number of amino acids involved in a specific interaction between two proteins, it would take on the order of 10 to the 21st or so, which is would be prohibitive for virtually any organism except a single-celled organism.
10 to the 21st?
Yes. That's a big number.
It is important to keep science and religion separated, correct?
No, no, it's a very complex business. By that example, I was trying to say that what some people think to be religion at the time may turn out to be understandable later on. But if you rule out an explanation which seems to describe the data pretty well because it seems to have unwelcome philosophical or religious overtones, then I think that does science a disservice.
These hearings have been an unjustified waste of taxpayer money intended first to justify the board's support for inserting creationist claims into the science standards and to provide a showcase for the national intelligent design movement. The minority report and witnesses have misrepresented many educational issues, including the role of standards and the draft 2 position on teaching students the skills of scientific inquiry.
Mr. Iraganagorai's testimony lasted about 1 hour and 45 minutes. It ended with his refusal to submit his presentation to any questions.
Your duty is to carefully look after the dollars that Kansas taxpayers work so hard in order to pay the state. You have a responsibility that is much greater than each of you individually. You have a responsibility to the children and the future of the state, a responsibility that you have sadly failed. This was a gigantic waste of money and an insult to Kansas teachers with great potential harm to teachers and students. stand here as counsel for Draft 2. I am not a witness, and therefore I will not stand for questioning.
Given the breach of the rules by the opposing counsel, the rules being that we would have an opportunity to cross-examine for an amount of time equal to half of their presentation time, which would be approximately an hour. I don't have any problem if he doesn't want to answer my questions, but I do think, given the fact that I should have an hour, I should have the opportunity to respond to what he has just said. What is so significantly absent from the majority case is the data. Where is the data to support the claim of evidence so overwhelming that there can be no dissent? So, the case for the majority simply is completely and totally empty.
Bye.
There is no evidence. There is no data. Only oratory. Look in your dictionary for the definition of the word boycott. Boycott is a mechanism designed to coerce silence. It's a mechanism to intimidate. And so what is happening here is that you're seeing those in positions of authority seeking to discourage and intimidate scientists from stepping forward and stating what is in their minds, what is in their heart. It is ugly. It is really ugly. This is what the strategy is. Quote, the strategy at this point is the same as it was in 1999. Notify the national and local media about what's going on. All of you in the audience. And portray them in the harshest light possible. Dr. Harris is the most humble guy I think I've ever known, and his brilliance is just mind-numbing. The guy is an internationally recognized scientist. He is doing work that could affect the lives of everybody in the entire world in a very positive way. And he is being derided as an ignoramus, as an unprincipled bully, as a breaker of rules. There may be no way to head off another science standards debacle, but we can sure make them look like asses as they do what they do. This is not by ID scientists. This is a compilation of about 17 articles of molecular biologists and biochemists. And at the beginning of the book, they raised 26 issues that evolution cannot explain. They're not being able to explain with natural selection. And they start off. The very first question is, why did metazoan body plans arise in a burst? How did we get all these body plans very suddenly? And what is the policy of the National Science Teachers Association? Do not adopt any policies that will suggest to students that life arises suddenly rather than gradually. You see, we can't show them any evidence that violates Darwin's prediction that diversity arises in a purely gradual way. What the problem is the fossil record is really inconsistent with that prediction. I have Greg Lassie. I have Ed Sisson. And these guys are being painted as ignoramuses, as unprincipled bullies. Anybody who criticizes evolution. Jill Gonzalez Bravo was in fear, was literally in fear to come and testify here. That is a situation that our society should not tolerate. So, thank you for this opportunity to speak and to give my closing argument.
Members of the Kansas State Board of Education Subcommittee on State Science Standards are Ms. Connie Morris, Ms. Kathy Martin, and Dr. Steve Abrams, Chairman.
Mr. Irgonagaray put up a PowerPoint that said that scientists will not participate because it gives the veneer of respectability. This would seem to indicate that science is more about obtaining respectability and not about seeking the truth. Obviously, if all the science was on the side of the evolutionists, they would come and embarrass the scientists that made presentations last week and those of us on the board by completely destroying the scientific evidence presented last week. Alan Leshner was quoted as saying, "Scientists love to fight, they love to argue in public, and they love to refute each other's point of view." If you look around the room, there's a lot of people here, a lot of cameras here. This seems like a pretty public place. A good place to have a debate about the evidences in science, particularly when that's what we're looking for. But indeed, no, such is not the case. What does happen instead is boycott.
As a teacher for over 31 years in Kansas public schools, I did applaud and cheer for the outstanding young science teacher from Rose Hill as she presented her experience in college classes and her classroom, and the educator from Ohio who's been a leader in helping his state to address this issue. The board has been accused of being closed-minded, and these hearings as being rigged. I guess we'll leave it up to the public, who might be the jury in this matter, to answer some of the questions that I would have liked to ask the council based on what we've heard these 4 days. Which side of the issue is being closed-minded?
I've taught in the public schools for 9 years, and I am a Kansas licensed teacher. I've sat through numerous teacher in-service sessions and prepared thousands of lesson plans. I assure you, teachers need clear direction on legal boundaries in the classroom. In fear of retribution, teachers err on the side of silence, which could mean a weakened education. Teachers need clear authority to present criticisms of evolution.
That concludes these hearings. I thank you for attending.